This episode is brought to you by novel Til The Bitter endemic. What if there was a happy ending to a pandemic? Perhaps an unexpected love story. After Daisy gets thrust into mandatory quarantine for an infection she can't explain, it's up to her to unravel the truth as to what's behind it and what she can ultimately do to escape it. But she can't do this alone, and that's where she finds not only herself, but a very special person that opens their heart for the betterment of their survival. Find out how in Til The Bitter endemic, coming soon. Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art. I'm your host, Philip Church, filling in for Novo, and today we're going to be talking about art in, well, a few different things. Visual arts, literary arts, and honestly, there's going to be a lot of focus on art and horror, but also art through perseverance. And we're interviewing Dan Henk. Dan is an illustrator and author and tattoo artist. He began his career as an illustrator doing both political cartoons for Madcap magazine and then working for magazine Maximum Rock and Roll. After that, Dan enrolled himself into art school after a series of tragic events in 1997 involving both a horrific car accident as well as a knife fight. Before long, Dan moved himself to the Big Apple and got into the hardcore scene, doing album cover work for bands and show art posters and all kinds of fun stuff. In 2000, Dan began tattooing, and yet by September 2001, tragedy tried to rear its head again with brain cancer. I'd say tried because, obviously, it didn't get him. He's here to interview, and so thanks to chemo and surgery, Dan made it through. Then, within months of the surgery, he married a fellow tattoo artist, Monica Castillo. In the years that followed, Dan's tattoo work took off and was noticed by publications. And then in 2007, tragedy came back and actually did strike, and very hard, claiming the life of Monica in a hit-and-run accident, and the culprit was unfortunately never found. Dan relocated to Austin, Texas to reevaluate his life, and in 2011 published his first novel, The Black Seas of Infinity. Dan has since published multiple novels and short stories and hosts his own podcast titled Skull Sessions. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Obviously, I have read some of your work. I happen to have had the pleasure of narrating the sort of updated, not updated, there's a better word for that. I got to update The Black Seas of Infinity, and so that's basically how we were introduced.
And then updated, revised,
revised.
Yeah.
That's the better word for it. Thank you. This always happens to me. I got to narrate the revised version of The Black Seas of Infinity, which was just a really awesome read. It was the most action-packed thing I've gotten to narrate, so it was just a real fun step in my audio career for me. I've listened to some episodes of your podcast, of course. And so one of the things that I mentioned at the top that I definitely want to talk about a lot is will be horror. But I also mentioned the various ways in which that you were an artist. And so knowing that horror will end up taking focus for just a little bit, I do often prefer to kind of go chronologically. So I guess I want to talk about what got you into, illustration and drawing, and especially how you went to what some could describe as real life horror of talking about politics.
I was raised in isolated army bases all over the world, and often we'd be in fairly rural settings, and there's not really much to do in those places. And I'm not big into sports. I like MMA. I compete in that a lot. But at the time, I'm old. This is in the 70s, so there was no MMA. So what it is, a lot of building tree forts and bicycling around. But I would always go to the local library. I check out this giant stack of books. And I was reading full adult novels by fourth grade. I was just immersed in all that stuff. Check out a whole stack of books, have them all read within a week, and then go back for more. I could not stop. And I lived kind of in my own fantasy world. And, I would draw stuff and I would write stuff, and it was just that was my escape. That was my escape from the normal, boring life.
You talked about plowing through lots of novels. I'm kind of curious about what some standouts were for you at that point.
Let's see. I remember I read, it was called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It was,
oh, hell yeah. Philip K. Dick.
K. Dick book that made the movie Blade Runner. And I remember that stood out. I remember I read all the Stainless Steel Rat novels. I didn't think that they were a high caliber. If it was a movie, it'd be a B movie. But like, I read all the Choose Your Adventures, and I'd read every iteration that you could like pick. So like maybe I go on this path, maybe I go on that path. But again, I didn't really think that they were high quality. They were there. Like I said, I read everything. I remember I read Dune. I thought Dune was amazing, like Frank Herbert's original novel Dune. I remember I read Neuromancer. I thought that was amazing.
Oh, that's one I never got to read.
No, and later
Neuromancer
on,
specifically.
I read Snow Crash. Like that whole like cyberpunk kind of trash punk, mixed with like sci-fi elements. That was all started by William Gibson, like to the best of my knowledge. And I remember I also read a bunch of stuff by H.P. Lovecraft, and like they collected his stuff in these books. And I remember Michael Whelan painted the cover for him, and it was an awesome cover. And that's back in the day when people would like pick up stuff based on how good the cover looked. And I remember like I was like, with the cover like that, it's got to be good. And I read it. It actually really spoke to me because it was basically horrors that were kind of like surreal, but kind of like, everything was dark on the edge of society, and you're fighting against the darkness. And that really spoke to me. And I remember I read all of his stuff, and I thought they were awesome. I remember I read a lot of early Edgar Allan Poe stuff. I thought that was awesome.
Practically like original horror at that.
Oh yeah.
Depending on what you consider. I mean, technically, some people would definitely argue, and I mean, it's definitely fair to consider that Mary Shelley also kind of invented a lot of horror, having written Frankenstein. But yeah, Poe for sure.
Frankenstein. I thought Frankenstein was great. I read that. I read the original Dracula. I thought that was really good. Even the movie incarnation of it. I mean, it was it was well done. Like, it had really good actors and a really good director. I don't know that Keanu Reeves was like the right character. And I don't know that Winona Ryder was the right character. I mean, they both proven themselves in future incarnations to be much better than they were then. I think they were like young, and they just weren't those characters.
I kind of agree. I feel like there was a certain amount of cheese around the movie that while Gary Oldman carried the hell out of it, and it's still overall so obviously
carries any movie he's in. He's so awesome.
He's too damn good. The man is the bar is too high. It's not fair for anybody around him. And actually, even to go back and touch a little bit for a moment on the like appeal of Lovecraft too. I like the fact that his prose is excellent. The man just knows how to construct sentences. His descriptions of things are insanely vivid. And part of what's so fun is that he'll go from things that are so normal. He'll be describing a city. He'll, like be describing the boat, that's floating down this weird ethereal river and all these weird cities that he's seeing along the way in certain things. And he's conjuring up certain amount of imagery in your mind. And then the fun part is the fact that he knows to always go right to the precipice of like the uncanny valley and let the reader's imagination take over for what horrible shit must lurk in there. Not to say that he never, did go on to describe some of these things to an extent, but I do think that's a big part of the lasting appeal and the sort of like beyond just notoriety that Lovecraft has earned over the years.
Like, the things that really grabbed me with Lovecraft is like, one, he has an amazing imagination. Like, he still blows away most people to this day. And he was a very smart person. He did a lot of personal reading, a lot of personal research. I wouldn't say he was without his foibles, and I wouldn't say that, he didn't engage in a little bit of purple prose, but it's like, I kind of look past that stuff, and I look for the good in everything. That's what really grabs me about Lovecraft. He really did a lot of stuff. And I know that a number of people, like, they're bringing up stuff like for instance, he was racist. And they bring up like a bunch of stuff about him, but in a way, I almost, I wouldn't say that, I give it a pass or excusable. I mean, that's obviously, horrendous, but he was a scared little boy. Like his mom told me he was too ugly to go outside, and she would lock him in a closet in the house. His dad was a traveling salesman who cheated on his mom and died of syphilis. I mean, he just, in a way, he was just a scared little boy, like, reacting in this world. And he came with some great stuff. He has some stuff that like I would not expect from somebody that's that troubled.
I mean, and not to mention, especially, I mean, yeah, back then that's what happened to him is horrifying regardless. And then especially back then with the whole, oh, we know these things that he said that were obviously, yeah, pretty like non-PC, shall we say. But even especially now in our age of like the internet and information and the type of celebrity that we have these days, everyone must somehow find the ability to separate art from artists at some point, because there are too many people that are insanely talented. They're also just insanely flawed people.
Like I love the Misfits. I think the Misfits are great. They're one of my favorite bands.
Hell yeah.
Do I think Danzig is the best person alive? No. So yeah, he's not the greatest person, but he put out some great material.
Yeah, again, you just kind of got to be able to take that sometimes where like, what's the word? Some phrase about salt. This always happens to me. But anyways, engulfing all of this work from various people, whether it's again like sci-fi, more like you said, like even just trash punk, horror, all this stuff. It's still it's interesting that the one of the first avenues that you truly explored and even found work for yourself in is the illustrations. And so I'm curious about leading up to that too. Where do you feel like being like the army, like base stuff, like bouncing around, did that at all influence you leading into doing like political stuff, or was it just the fact that you had shit to say and just wanted to say it?
Well, I think that I'm very well read. I think that I'm fairly intelligent. And my dad has a doctorate. And my dad, like, he would teach at Army War colleges. And my dad's nothing like me. He's like super religious, super conservative. You know, I'm mostly libertarian. And I would just argue everything with him. But the thing is, I would argue with him. And these are back in the days when you didn't really have much social media. So, like, long talks with dad, you know, were kind of what you filled the time with. Like, we didn't have like Nintendo. We didn't have.
That's what you
did. We
did.
didn't even have a TV until the seventh grade. So, like, I remember we'd have like literally like a 2 hour talk about something. So, it'd always be about like history, because he specialized in history. So we talk about history. We talk about, and what I can't believe is how incredibly religious he is. And with everything that would come up, that I say, well, how was Noah 900 years old? How this? How that? And then he'd go, well, we just don't understand the mind of God. It's like, okay, well, you're kind of just giving it a pass instead of like
talking
that's not good enough.
Come on, yeah. Let's like talk about this critically, right?
But the nice thing, about those is like, some people like, if you challenge their belief system, they get mad at you personally, and he wouldn't do that. He would move on.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an important thing to be able to do, is just to hear things that are different from what you believe and simply go, no, like yes, or just I choose not to engage, or like whatever. I mean, yeah, there's nowhere that says, hey, I have to get angry about all this shit and I'm going to yell at you. Like that's a weird choice that a lot of people choose to make. So that's awesome that your dad was able to do that. And I guess just kind of keep you using your brain of just saying like, not discouraging you, not saying anything that would ever, make you question yourself to be like, should I be questioning everything? Like to question the questioning. So
yeah, my dad was very
that's pretty
big
rad.
on questioning everything. And the most he would do is if there was something that he disagreed with, he would just say, well, I disagree with that. And then he'd just move on. I think my dad's a very intelligent guy, which again makes me a little surprised. He's so incredibly religious. Like they made me go to church 4 times a week. And like there's a tattoo shop that I own, the tattoo shop, and I was working there, and I co-own it, and the guy that co-owns it with me, he has this person that's he tattoos. She's not really religious. She goes to church like maybe 3 times a year, but she loves the fact that she can pretend to be super religious while I'm there, so she can argue with me. But I don't really care.
It is funny how people who want to believe certain things think that, oh, just read the book and you'll get it. And it's like, no, I've read the book and that's what actually makes me not get it. But yeah, so you went on questioning things and you went on to, like you said, just question both sides. And so as I've sort of been able to find out, that you were not in any way, skewed. And I think that's a lot of what maybe made it easy to get into political cartoons for you, right? Was that you like might do something scathing towards, one party and then turn around and do something that was scathing to the other party. And that, like,
That's
by doing
exactly
the
what I
South
would
Park
do.
method, basically, was that, guess what? Everyone's like fair game and you're all going to get it if you do some dumb shit.
Well, I remember, like, so I did a couple things. I did a cover and interior illustrations for Maximum Rock and Roll, and I kind of, I was doing all these, like, flyers for bands, and, like, painting people's leather jackets and stuff. And I remember I did, just for the fun of it, I did a political cartoon making fun of the Republicans. And if you remember, it was called The Contract with America. And it was like, we're going to change, we're going to fix this place. This is our contract. So I did it. It's called The Contract on America. So I did the Statue of Liberty and, like, gun sites. And I did, like, Newt Gingrich. He's like a mob boss. He's all fat and eating a plate of spaghetti. And so I did, like, everybody, like Bob Dole, I did as the enforcer, and he has brass knuckles on, so it was totally making fun of them. So I remember Madcap Magazine, they heard about me and they picked me up. They're like, oh, we love this cartoon. We'd love to hire you. So that was the first cartoon I did for them. And then the next one I did was when Bill Clinton was president, and I had hit Hillary Clinton on the roof of the White House shooting an AK-47. She's like, no, you need health care. And, like, James Brady's down on the lawn. He's like, oh, he got him in the head. So it's like, first I pissed off all the Republicans. Then I pissed off all the Democrats. But the thing is, so they would get more hate mail for my political cartoons than for anybody else, but it would also sell more issues.
I mean, controversy is a great way to sell, and especially back in, like, pre-internet days of just the only way to find out, wait, who said what? It's like, dude, you gotta go pick this magazine up and see this thing. And well, there you go.
And, like, there's, like, metal news boxes on Capitol Hill. So people would, like, drop a quarter in it to take out the paper to see how they were offended this time.
I mean, and that luckily lent itself from Madcap to, interestingly, like, you from there went on to Maximum Rock and Roll. And, and somewhere in this point too, I mean, surely it's not like you also just decided one day out of nowhere, like, okay, I'm just going to learn how to draw for the sake of political cartoons. Obviously you had been doing art in general, because you don't just go from political cartoons to, like, like posters and, like, hardcore scene work and like, all the various, like, show posters and, like, art and stuff. So, like, what was it that sort of led you from Madcap towards Maximum Rock and Roll in, like, the hardcore scene area?
I get into like what I call, like, bad metal, like Def Leppard and Quiet Riot and Ran and stuff.
Who didn't have that phase? Come on.
And that's when I was like 12. And then I remember I was living in basically white trash Florida, in Gainesville, Florida, and my dad was getting his doctorate at the University of Florida. And I remember I picked up, there was a local, remember when we had cassette tapes?
Oh, yeah.
There's a local cassette tape shop, that sold used cassette tapes. And I remember I picked up 3 albums at the same time: Hell Waits by Slayer, Ride the Lightning by Metallica, and Peace Sells by Megadeth. And that changed my world. So then for a while, that was my big thing. And then I remember, then I get into punk rock. And I got into first Sex Pistols, and then, Black Flag and Dead Kennedys and stuff. So I was super into that stuff. But it was, and that, by the way, is when me and my parents really did not start getting along. They made me go to a Christian psychiatrist.
Obviously, it still, like, was all part of the journey, right? And it literally took you on a actual journey where you relocated, for a good while at least, to New York. And you also made the transition over to tattooing as well. Like, was that somebody, basically, I'm assuming a tattoo artist must have been like, hey, I love your shit. Have you ever thought about inking people?
That's pretty much exactly what happened. I was in Virginia. By the way, I turned 18 and my parents kicked me out of the house and moved. So I was homeless, like, for 8 months, like, living in the woods, rock as a pillow, taking showers at McDonald's restrooms. And then I remember when I got on my feet and I was, like, big in the punk rock scene. Like, we lived in a punk rock squat for a while. It was kind of dicey. But when I kind of got on my feet and it got things going, I was really trying to make it as a comic book artist. And I remember I interviewed with like via long distance email. This is back when you actually mailed stuff. There were no
Snail
computers.
mail.
But I remember I interviewed with Image Comics and DC Comics, and I remember Kitchen Sink picked up my stuff. And I remember Paradox Press, which was a division of DC Comics that handled black and gray, more adult themed work, picked up my stuff. And that's right around the time when like almost everybody went bankrupt. Like they had that bubble with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all the like indie stuff that blew up really big and then collapsed. So everyone was going bankrupt and nobody wanted anything except for their properties. I got picked up by Kitchen Sink and Paradox Press and they folded. You know,
Man.
so I was like, well, I really want to make it as a comic artist. Like I'm doing political cartoons. I'm thinking like maybe that's going to be the future. So I went to Illustration Society meeting in Baltimore, and everybody's like, "Oh, this this is a dying thing," and everybody's real negative. So I was like, "Well, obviously I'm not going to do that." So and all these people are folded. I was like, "What do I got to do?" So I was trying to figure out what to do. So I put myself through art school, and like I remember community college was all I could afford. Like I went to in high school, I went to my guidance counselor to see if I could somehow get a scholarship or a loan or whatever. Her words to me were, she said, "Get ready for a cure of pumping gas because that's all you're ever going to do." I was like, "Well, I guess that's not the way to go." So I eventually I was working a couple of jobs, I was going to college, and my art teacher, he was a big fan of my stuff, and he said, if you want to make it as an artist, you got to move to New York. So I moved to New York, and I remember I interviewed DC Comics. That's right when they almost went bankrupt. Like the movie saved them, So it was like, fuck, what am I gonna do? And like I did album covers, and the thing is, like, you do album covers for somebody, like you do this like 60-hour oil painting. You give them oh, that's awesome. And you go, "Hey man, well, can I get some money? I can pay my rent." And they go, "Oh, talk to the label." You talk to the label, and the label goes, "Oh, well, we give them an advance. Part of the advance is put the cover artwork." So then I talk to the artist and they go, "Oh, is that what it's for? We blew that." And I was like, and so while I'm like trying to figure out some way to make it, and I'm working at a restaurant, I'm working at Hard Rock Cafe, which sucks. It like slowly sucks the life out of you. I had a friend of my brother's who was a tattoo artist. His name was Chad Dibble, and he saw my stuff and he goes, "That guy should tattoo." So I was thinking like, I'll tattoo until I, quote, get a real job. And then I just loved it. And I've stuck with it ever since. And fortunately, it gives me the freedom to do plenty of stuff.
Hell yeah. I mean, it's funny, like, all the things that people used to say and shit like get a real job. It's like, there are so many people who have made their living off of things that people used to teasingly say about, like, go get a real job. It's like, I have one, thank you very much. And I mean, and you were able to make that part of what you did. Obviously for a while. And then, obviously somewhere in this point, as I mentioned up top, you had brain cancer all of a sudden that you had to deal with. And that, interestingly, not only would have put perspective on your life in general, which I'm obviously curious to hear about, but along the way, since it was within months of the surgery that got rid of the last of the cancer, that you got married to a fellow tattoo artist.
I worked in a couple of like kind of like sketchy shops. I worked at Underground Tattoo, which was in East New York, which is where Mike Tyson's from. Like I'd be walking to work and people would be in the balcony screaming "White Devil" at me and throwing shit, and so it was kind of a sketchy place to work. Worked at another place in Queens called Junction Tattoo, which is horrible. So I got my first real job. What I consider my first real job. Like I worked in a couple of those shops that are like bigger name shops, but I didn't think they were that good. And then I worked in Andromeda downtown. And Andromeda was the first one where I was like, I really started to make it like as a career. I first got featured in magazines. And I remember if you worked in Andromeda, they had like kind of a shitty, like on the side shop that was in a bad area that like had one little room for tattooing and they sold jewelry. And it was called Cassiopeia. And, everybody who worked in Andromeda had to work there. And when I would do my day a week there, the new counter girl was Monica, which is the girl I eventually got married to. So in my like awkward social way, I hit on her. I mean, she's an immigrant, so she didn't have really good English, and I didn't have really good Spanish, so it was like a little hard to communicate at first. But then I tattooed her, and we started going out, and then I came down with brain cancer, and that was only like 3 months after we started going out. But I'm in the hospital with brain cancer, and it's really weird because when something serious happens in your life, you'd be surprised how many people you thought were your best friends are no longer there. It's not like they said, fuck you, we don't talk to you. It's like they just kind of ghosted me. And I remember I had 3 people that I knew visit me in the hospital, and one was her. And every single day she visited me. And every day she looked like she looked sad, she looked pressed, she was like, hey, are you doing all right? Can I bring you anything? I was like, this is a good person. So I married her. Like, 3 months later, I married her.
I mean, and as one would, especially in that situation where, like you said, other people showed their true colors. It was a time of need, and you didn't get support from other people, but the kind of support that you found in her obviously was life changing and worth holding on to. And in this time too, you started seeing even more tattoo success. That the tattoo work was taking off, and you were getting into like publications.
Yeah, it really started blowing up. And it's weird. Like I refer to it as my 15 minutes of fame because like out of nowhere, like so I was just like I was getting there, and then all of a sudden it was like boom, like everybody, like people were inviting me to conventions in Europe, and they're like, we'll pay for your plane flight, we'll give you a free place to stay, we'll give you a free booth, we have customers for you, just show up. I was like, wow, so yeah, everything all blew up at once. It's kind of weird. It's like, so I've been through chemotherapy, which is brutal. And I've been through chemotherapy. I've been married for 6 years at the time. And then all of a sudden, everything just started taking off. I don't know. It's like a surreal experience almost. But yeah, that's when it took off.
You ended up relocating to Austin, Texas. When did you make that decision, and what all kind of led there?
Well, my tattoo career was taking off, but I kind of feel like it took me so long to get a paying art job that I was like, I'm gonna put all my effort into this as much as possible. So I had over a year wait. I was tattooing 7 days a week, sometimes like 12 hours a day, and so I was getting burnt out. And at some point, I was like, you know what? I've had it with New York. I was like, I had brain cancer here. My wife died here, and there are a lot of people that like I remember I had a guy from Wall Street and just having me tattoo the Wall Street bowl on him with like all Wall Street around it. And every time he'd pay, he'd make sure that he paid with like that black, that black card. What is it? American Express. It's
I
like,
mean, literally at the MX Black card.
yeah. Where you have to spend like 150 grand a year on it just to keep it. So he'd always make sure he paid for that just to show me he's a baller. But he never tipped me or anything. And then I remember I had such a wait list, I couldn't get him in fast enough for his next appointment. So he went to somebody else to get the tattoo finished. It was like, so I'm dealing with all these like dirt bags. I'm working my ass off. Everything just seems so negative. That I moved to Austin, Texas. And I remember right before I moved, Wayne Simmons, who was he wrote he was big for a while. I don't know what happened to him. He just disappeared. But he wrote a number of zombie books, and I remember that one of the main characters was a female tattoo artist. So he wanted to run it by me to see if it was a correct portrayal. It wasn't. It was pretty bad. But he listened to me and he changed it. And that book is called Drop Dead Gorgeous, and it came out, and it like got him like to bigger publishers and stuff like that. But I remember when he did that, I was like, I've been working on a story, and like I've been working on a story since I was like 15. At first, it was going to be like a graphic novel, and then it was going to be an illustrated novel. But I kind of been putting on pause with this whole like cancer and getting married and all this sort of stuff. And so I was like, life is short. I gotta get on this. So, him put me in touch with this publisher, and that kind of like lit a fire in my ass to get it restarted. So I moved to Austin. tattooing, was slower in Austin than it was in New York City. And I was able to put effort into it.
And in 2011, you published your first novel, which was The Black Seas of Infinity. And I'm curious about the lead up to that as well, of like, the idea had been ruminating and you had never written any of it, or you had written tidbits and then one day it just like gushed out. Like, tell me about getting The Black Seas of Infinity like down on paper / computer.
Yeah, the version that you did the audio for, I'm pretty proud of because I feel that's a very refined version of what I've been working on almost since I was like 14 or 15. Like originally it was going to be a graphic novel, and originally it was going to be a comic book, then a graphic novel. I remember I read Watchmen, and that really inspired me. And I was like, because before that I was kind of debating, art or writing. I like both. I don't know, how they would incorporate. And then I read Watchmen. I was like, oh, you can do both. This is amazing. And so then and when I was in Northern Virginia, there are a lot of this is the early days of comic shops, but there were comic shops and used bookstores, and there were indie artists that worked there. So I'd bring my stuff to them and get it critiqued. And, I was kind of keeping on that path when I moved to Virginia. And, I sent away stuff to like Marvel and like Paradox Press and stuff like that. So I still had the idea of doing it, of doing the story, but doing it as a graphic novel, and it just kept evolving as time passes. Like more stuff happens in your life, there's more that goes into it. And finally, the version that I brought out in 2011, it was a version that I had all along, but like, obviously very refined and kind of added on to and reworked and re-envisioned, but the core of it stayed the same. And so that came out, and I remember when they came out in 2011, like I've learned so much as a writer since then. I've done like workshops from like Stephen King and like Alan Moore. And I felt that, that core idea was great, but if I just took it and went in there with my like over a decade of writing experience and rewrote it would pop. It would really pop. I could really accomplish what I wanted to. And that's what I did. I gave it to you to do the audiobook, and I've gotten great accolades so far.
Fantastic. Always happy to hear that, obviously. And then especially from here, what I want to kind of do is talk about specifically like the kind of sort of like horror or approach in general that you would not only take or describe as Black Seas of Infinity, but use that as a springboard to talk about the different types of horror in general, because dare say that one of, if not my absolute favorite type of movie is a good horror movie. I fucking love horror movies. Almost everything else that, they can make movies about, with the exception, of course, of like science fiction and high fantasy to a certain extent, but most of the things you can find in your real life. And I think that's part of it, is that horror is just, of course, like dark fantasy, if not, or dark science fiction. So that's some of the coolest stuff that I've ever seen sometimes are these amazing ideas. And, so, Black Seas of Infinity, like, how would you sort of describe the genre? And then what are some other like sort of subgenres of horror that, I guess maybe like speak to you the most and that are your favorite?
I would say my absolute favorite is like kind of cosmic horror, which is, basically that's the style that Lovecraft, especially maybe even invented. I don't know if he invented, but he definitely kind of brought it to the mainstream. But that whole like I really like if you take movie versions like The Mist is great, Event Horizon is great.
God, I love Event Horizon. That is one of the best horror movies of all time.
Oh, that's great. But yeah, no, I really like that. But it's like there's like a sci-fi element to it, but there's a very dark edge to it. And even when it's like for instance, if you watch the show The Witcher, it's like fantasy with a dark edge to it. So I appreciate it across all genres. Probably my least favorite is just like I tend to like almost all horror movies, but I get very easily bored when they're just splatter. When they're just like a serial killer or whatever. It's like if it has a clever twist to it, like you saw the movie Seven. Like the
Yeah.
what's in the
Oh yeah.
box? What's in the box? All
Oh
right.
yeah.
Yeah, so that movie was great, but it had a clever twist to it. Whereas
Yeah, the killer like had that awesome obsession with obviously like the seven deadly sins and the way that they went about enacting these like horrible crimes. It was fantastic. It wasn't just for the sake of like, oh, like either my best friend is an effects guru and I want to, have him make a movie with me, or just I enjoy dreaming up like murder porn.
yeah,
Is what a
yeah,
lot of
no,
horror seems to
exactly.
be. And it did it gives some a bit of bad name because anybody can slap together like a really just brain dead plot,
But it's like, have you seen like the movie Frailty?
a
Twist to
good
it.
psychological slash
Yeah,
like religious, like
yeah,
that is a
and like
fantastic movie.
you think that the good guy is a good guy, but turns out to be a bad guy. Like I don't want to give you any spoilers, but it's like there's some amazing stuff there. Anything that's kind of like complex and grabs me, especially when it has a twist. Like even when it's like, I mean, it's horror, but it's maybe a little bit of fantasy horror. Like if you read the book I Am Legend, which they've tried to make into a movie a bunch of times, and they've never quite
I
booked.
need to read the damn book actually because
The
I
book
have
is so
seen
good.
both. I've seen both
I
the actual
generation.
The Will Smith one
Actually,
you're talking
there's
about, as well as
three.
Charlton Heston. I'm blanking on
Yeah,
that
that's
one.
the Omega Man.
A Mega Man. Thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I've definitely seen
there's
that one too.
one. There's one that's kind of based on the story, but it's like not very like close to the story. And then there was the Omega Man, which is the closest to the story. Then there was a new one with Will Smith, which I really didn't like. They first of all they killed a dog. Never killed a dog.
Oh
Unless
my
it's
God.
like
That's one of my most hated. Anytime I'm in a horror movie and I see that there's a dog, I'm like, if you introduced a fucking dog simply to make my emotions get more involved, then you are a piece of shit because you're right. It's going to make me hate something.
yeah, and like with the Will Smith version, also it's like they say that he was like the he was the last man, the last man because he invented the virus. He invented the cure. Like spoiler alert, that's not in the book.
Yeah, there were some seeming liberties, even just in general, that the author of that book, whose name I'm of course blanking on because welcome to Showtime, where my brain just farts constantly. But I mean, that was like what Hill House, I Am Legend.
Daniel Matheson.
Thank you, God, yeah, Daniel Madison. I mean, yeah, and that's the fun thing is that horror touches so many different things that
Richard
even like
Matheson. I'm sorry, his name is Richard Matheson.
that sounds even more correct. Thank you for correcting me. Hey, fans, sorry about that. You can get at me in the comments. Do not blame Dan for that. But yeah, that like, horror has touched everything from, graphic novels and comic books to movies and books. And that, like mentioned earlier in the show too, horror goes back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to an extent, and I'm sure that there's been other things that maybe just never found publication, and that other macabre ideas can be found all throughout religion, and history in general. So
One thing I like about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is actually Dr. Frankenstein is a monster. The monster he creates is not a monster. It's just like somebody who's mistreated and scared of society and just getting tormented and lashing out.
yeah, he did not ask to be reborn, and he did not ask to look so horrific.
I kind of sympathize with the monster.
There's a psychology that plays into horror that when done well, horror can speak such volumes. And then
Oh yeah.
interestingly, on the ground level, it can still have fun shit where like even at its worst of like gore porn, you can even touch on both. There are movies that have fantastic psychological elements and that will touch on like the fact that you almost never get violence-free horror.
Well, it wouldn't be horror then.
Right, exactly. It's like to an extent, they are similar and one and the same. And that, like for instance, to go back to Event Horizon, that has some insanely graphic shit in it because, gee, this machine that we made that essentially goes through space. Well, the reason it cuts through space is because it takes a shortcut through a hell dimension.
Right.
And so of course people are going to rip their fucking eyes out and have like a disgusting blood orgy and like murder each other in the most unconscionable, undescribable ways. It's impossible to separate the two to an extent. Not to say that there isn't psychological horror and thriller aspects of life, that you could almost say that to an extent thrillers and certain mysteries are violence-free horror, because it's not that real life can't be horrible, but just I do feel like when you talk about horror in writing and film to an extent, the word horror almost always implies to an extent that there's just going to be some blood in it. There just literally will at some point be some sort of mortality and or violence or blood or something.
Right. Well, you can have something that creeps the shit out of you that has nothing to do with really splatter and gore. Like, did you ever see the movie The Changeling?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The 70s one? Really good. It's a ghost story. And like,
Yeah.
nobody actually dies in it, but it's super creepy. It's very well done.
I mean, I guess in a way, and sorry, spoilers, everybody, this movie is fucking 50 years old, deal with it. I guess in a way, there is this sort of like disembodied voice of just like, find me or whatever. Like, to an extent, like somebody died at some point, but it was kind of like before the story. Exactly. Yeah. It wasn't on screen, and it's not like somebody murdered a child. It just happens to be that a death led to the situation in which there's a sort of ghost related mystery about, like who is who. And again, a little bit of spoiler there, everybody, but also at the same time, as you can tell, I'm dancing around it in case anyone's still interested.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, there are so many different ways. And I think that's another fun thing is that there have been a lot of fantastic modern horror movies. And by modern, I just basically mean since the advent of like pretty legit CGI and really advanced, like cinematography and stunt type of stuff. But even still, ignoring all the hilarious gore porn shit from like the 80s, there still are some really fun classic horror movies. I mean, for instance, Alien is absolutely a horror movie.
Oh, it's a masterpiece. Yeah.
And again, yes, there's violence, but it's like so much of it is not about the fear of like, oh no, somebody's again, like, arm is going to be shattered and blood's going to fly. Again, it's not gore porn horror, but it is also classic from the like 70s, like thrilling. There's the fact that there's a monster on a ship. And by the way, the ship is in space. So like there is literally no escape, like the ultimate death machine in the galaxy.
Yeah.
I think that's another cool thing is that when done well, even with or without a lot of like violence or gore or whatever you want to call it, that there's some fantastic classic stuff that again you do not need CG or whatever. Like you really can just have a good plot, just really solid ideas that are well executed for just good horror. And I think that's like the thing that will just bring me back to it forever and ever, because to this day, some of my favorite movies and some of the most impactful things that I've ever seen are either straight up horror or tinged with it, because again, life can be horrible. Psychological horror is absolutely a thing.
Well, if you don't get into that, like people get real like OCD maniacal about it. They're like, well, this counts as horror, but this is sci-fi and this is this. And so, no, I think anything with like kind of a dark element can be horror. It kind of depends on, like, if you're looking for something with horror, you don't have to look for a specific label. Like, you've probably seen, like, the original Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston.
Oh, yeah.
That has a very horrifying ending. Like, I wouldn't say that's a straight up fantasy. I wouldn't say that's straight up. I mean, you could say that's kind of a horror movie. Like there's
a handful of horror all throughout it.
Yeah.
I mean, even just the concept of like waking up in space and like all of a sudden you're alone, like your cohorts, like what was it? Like their sleep pods like broke. Yeah, there's a lot of that can easily be characterized as horror. I mean, yes, it is fiction. It's like of the scientific variety because it involves space travel and stuff. But I mean, think about what it would be like to be that character. It's fucking horrific. It's horrible. Yeah. It's horror. That is essentially a horror movie, if you ask me. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I like that. I think that's the thing to me is that horror is so malleable because it is present. I mean, even nature is brutal as shit. Nature is super metal sometimes, like just the way that certain animals behave and how things kill each other sometimes. It's just like the relationships between like prey and predator. And I mean, speaking of which, like, there you go. Like there's another like basically horror movie, if you will, so that therefore like that goes to show you that intrinsically like nature itself inspired that, because like the word itself just boom, like predator, it implies like violence and hunting and like fear.
Incorporate a little comedy in it if you don't make it the whole thing comedy. Like I don't know if you saw Starship Troopers.
Oh, like, yeah.
Starship Troopers definitely has some comedy in it. Like, it's kind of making fun of that, like, super jingoistic America, or whoever.
Yeah.
Like,
but I'm doing my part.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, there's some very, like, serious elements to it. there's some stuff that really makes you think. Like, at the end, spoiler alert, maybe the bugs aren't the bad guys.
They're just a different thing. Some
Yeah.
of them only know to kill, and then there's the brain one that only knows survival. I mean, yeah, it's like they're just creatures. Like,
And they're like mistreating it and like, yeah. So it's like, I don't know. I think there's some pretty heavy concepts. And I think to like kind of wrap it all up, I think that that's what's more important. Like a good story with some heavy concepts as opposed to like, yeah, we'll just throw some stuff that'll shock you on the screen.
yeah, exactly. It's not about just being shocking, which I think some people just went in the wrong direction with it and gave it somewhat of a bad reputation, I should say, with a few bad ideas. And that I really appreciate the fact that, and especially thanks to the like A24 style of more indie type of horrors, where it's not just about like making a popcorn thing that's going to sell a shit ton and just, it's just another Jason. You just want to use a franchise. Because don't get me wrong, like the Halloween reboot from recently, like the post Rob Zombie reboot was actually fantastic. The sequel, the middle one sucked and the third one was okay, but that first one, Halloween reboot, was damn good in my opinion. So I mean, it's not to say that all of the major franchises are corny, because like the Freddy Krueger franchise has some fun in it, but it's silly and it's also very gory. And I've watched just about all of them. So I mean, I can't say that I haven't tried, but I mean, yeah, I think when taken just seriously enough, and with enough other serious concepts involved, horror can be an incredibly overarching, or like very inclusive, I should say, genre that has some of my favorite films of all time. And I guess one last thing to touch on too, as before we kind of call it in general, is like you just mentioned, actually, horror and comedy go together so damn well. And I love when people can do that balance, not even always to the extent of like your Sam Raimi-esque, where it's like goofy slapstick 1 second. And then like, it doesn't have to go that far with some of the camp. But I do feel like that's also another thing that's interestingly cathartic, is that for you to be laughing at like a good joke or just a hilarious, ironic setup one moment, and really relating to the character, I think takes you in and gets you more involved and you're invested. Yeah, like again, something clever, something ironic, something relatable. And therefore you're going to be more invested in the character or the plot in general, and therefore the horrific parts of the whatever you're watching or reading, are just, it's all the more engaging and therefore horrifying. And so that's when I think it's done best, and why I feel like it's just going to be my favorite genre, and I'm glad that it's at least come to a place where it's not all Freddy and Jason and just, again, like super silly effects, where you've got your Hereditaries and your Lighthouses and your other like indie stuff, and like, The Witch. And that's just movies. Again, like that. People continue to write good books. It's just harder for me to read as many books as easy as it is to sit down and watch movies. But yeah, I love the genre, and I'm glad that people like you also believe in it and continue to contribute to it. What's your current sort of balance of work looking like? I mean, between writing and like tattooing and everything, what do you find yourself doing these days?
Well, I own a shop, so a lot of what I do is working with the bills and the licenses and stuff. Actual tattooing, I probably tattoo about 3 days a week.
Okay.
I also do a lot of artwork, and I also do a lot of writing, and I also do a podcast, and I also I train for MMA still. I also do jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. So my girlfriend says
Oh
I
yeah.
do way too much. But I try it, like I figure I'll rest when I'm dead. I have like
Yeah.
plenty that I keep myself busy doing, and I enjoy doing that. So yeah, I mean, it kind of goes up and down depending on what's more pressing at the moment. But I try to only tattoo 3 days a week. I try to set aside an equal amount of time to also draw and to also write. I mean, technically that's 9 days a week. So,
I mean, yeah, but some of that's obviously going to overlap. Some days you do a
yeah.
bit of both. Some days you might almost even touch all three. But yeah, I mean, it's one thing to rest a part of your brain and to rest certain things, because there's scientific studies that show, like, no matter what you're doing, you have to take a break. You have to step away from a thing at some point, because perspective is important, as is just refreshing your brain. So
Whenever I find myself with a lack of inspiration for drawing or writing or whatever, I just take a break. I'll walk away, like I'll go for a bike ride or something, and then I'll come up with my next move. Whenever you just try and force it by doing it and doing it and doing it, it never comes out as well.
The muse cannot necessarily be forced. It will come to you. And it's not to say that you shouldn't ever like either sit down and write, sit down and draw, whatever, until you feel inspired. That is part of the dedication that I think people misunderstand about creating art is that, sometimes it is as simple as riding the last wave of inspiration
No, I think
through that, but sometimes you do have to fully step away to get your next inspiration and let that be the thing that then gets you back to sitting down and going back to the drawing board or going back to the computer and the typewriter, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. It's like, don't get frustrated and just walk away. Like, if you have something and you want to make it work, like keep at it until you feel like that you're kind of uninspired and out of the mode or out of the zone. And then you can step away, kind of recharge yourself, come back, but don't get as frustrated and just quit.
Everybody has issues with like productivity to a certain extent. People produce at different rates. People just act and behave differently. And everyone's going to have a different proclivity to whatever their medium is. And it's not to say that, if you're not producing art, I'm not saying that any non-artist is like a crap or lazy person. Not everybody's even made to do that. It's just that everybody does something. Everybody has a hobby. And luckily there's plenty of people whose hobby is making things for other people to enjoy and engage in. So, I mean, yeah, that's one of the things that I've definitely also found is that sometimes I can almost start to get down on myself, a feeling like, I'm not, spending enough time, like narrating, practicing. I'm not behind the mic enough. And it's like, I feel like that's like just me getting down on myself, and I can then turn around and like get a good project, and I'll just feel so damn motivated, and it reminds me all over again. I'm like, this is what it's about. That if I burned myself out on it, it wouldn't be worth it, and I wouldn't get to enjoy it as much as I do when I get to sit down with just a fresh pot of motivation, and like just all the steam is built up from having taken enough time away from it. So, it's never worth beating yourself up or forcing it over, and that just, do the other things that make you. That if you go for walks, if you go for bike rides, do the other things that you realize, like, what? I have my best ideas when I do blank or X. Do those things too. There's nothing wrong with doing that and chilling and enjoying your life, and then turning around and enjoying a hobby. And then hopefully, that's like for some of us, hobbies get to be creative.
And hopefully everything kind of ties together a little bit in your brain. So like, I do that. I like excise that portion of what I need. I got that out. Now I can focus on this.
Yeah, that too. It really is like a balancing game. It's like you get rid of the one thing, but that aspect of your brain is now free to move on to another thing. So, your brain will cling to ideas. You will sort of fixate on certain things sometimes, and it's just about chasing the rabbit just enough just to know that, like, okay, you caught this one, but guess what? There's another one to chase. And that's good because, yeah, again, like you just get to keep moving on, and keep either enjoying or creating or whatever it is. Hope sometimes both, enjoying creating. But yeah, with that, I'll just, leave it on a really good note.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to, talk to me about, your life, your journey, your inspirations, and the things that you've enjoyed that make you Dan Henk. Again, it was a pleasure working with you, and everybody hopefully will get to enjoy the revised version of Black Seas of Infinity at least as much as I enjoyed getting to narrate it. So again, Dan Henk, I believe is it danhenk.com, right?
Right.
Awesome. So that's where you can find Dan. Definitely his website. Actually, remind me of all of the socials, or what are the preferred ways that we can sort of look into you and your works and learn more about Dan?
Oh, there's so much. I have two Facebooks. I have Dan Henk Author and Dan Henk Tattoo. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I have a Wikipedia page. I have an Amazon authors page. I'm on Goodreads. So pretty much everything is like, I have a link tree. So, I have that. So you can go there and see what else I'm on.
So if you can't find Dan, you're clearly doing it wrong, everybody. You can take that from me. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, literally just the words Dan Henk Author alone sounds like you can find at least one of his socials as well as his website. So definitely check him out. Myself, I can be found at philipchurch.com and on social media as Philip Church Pro VO Nerd. NovodayProductions.com is where you can learn more about Art of the Beholder and some of the awesome books that have been published under the Novo Day umbrella. The social medias are at _Novo_Day, that's DE, and then there's at Novo Day Media. So like, subscribe, do all the things. If you'd like to sponsor our little love child or even be on the show, you can reach out to us at novodaymedia@gmail.com. Thanks again to Dan for joining us, and until next time, be good to each other, and as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you. Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACoMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Gestus, Jestus, of thejusticecompany.com. All rights reserved.